Okay, I'd like to call the meeting to order. We are on item 12.11. Councillor Cole, you had just finished questions. Are there any additional questions on this item?
No, I'll speak.
Okay, Councillor Cole will speak to the item 12.11. And just for the record, I'd like to point out that Councillor Layton is in the room. He's just not in his seat. Just those watching on camera. We have quorum. Because we are four, I will be granting hall passes for anyone that wants to leave their seats. Councillor Cole, you were speaking to the item?
Yeah, this is a most challenging traffic safety issue at the intersection of a highway that intersects with a residential street. Mayhem, it's you know, it is worse than mayhem. It's worse than mayhem, and I'm sure you know it ever trying to drive by there. But the Allen Road and the Eglinton. So what I would just like to move a motion that might help just make this a bit safer, in that there's, along with the incredible amount of construction equipment, the tunneling, the incredible number of vehicles that go through that intersection 24 hours a day, and the barriers, etc. There is constant traffic violations occurring there to make it even more dangerous.
Have you given them your motion?
Yeah, I'm going to paraphrase it, then I'll write it out after I speak. Okay?
You're supposed to present your motion. Would you like us to stand on the item while you prepare the motion? We'll
Yes.
move on to the next one. Okay. The next item, so we'll come back to 12.11 while Councillor Cole prepares his motion. Item 12.12, we did have Councillor Ainsley that sat here patiently for over 3 hours, so I'm going to say that we continue to hold this item to give him a few more minutes to get back. That brings us to 12.13, and we have a deputant on this one, Paula Davies. Thank you for joining us today. You have 5 minutes.
First of all, I'd just like to say I'm Paula Davies, and I'm in Ward 14, which is Councillor Fletcher's ward, and I live in the Don watershed. I belong to several environmental groups. One of them is Protect Nature, TO, but also Ontario Invasive Plant Council, Toronto Field Naturalists. And one of the things that's bugged me over the years is seeing too much salt on our roads and sidewalks and places. So I'm here to support Councillor Layton's request for particularly a review of what is going on the street, and I wanted to show you some of the things I've found. I care particularly about nature and the impacts of salt overuse on natural environments. I'm not saying we aren't going to need to use it. Of course we need to be safe, but there's a right amount to apply. And there's dramatic overuse of salt. It has negative impacts on plants and animals, and the contaminated soil does not favor native species of plants, which we all want to encourage. And then when the ice and snow melt, they dissolve, and the salty water and other pollutants end up in our streams and rivers. And the great big projects we're doing to contain stormwater, well, they don't remove salt. I'd like to state here now that TTC bus stops seem to have the worst oversalting, followed by entrances to the subways. The TTC corporate plan indicates that they want to accelerate efforts around energy and environmental stewardship, and TTC must improve its salt application procedures. The problem for plants is, here's some cedars, and you can see the salt burn on them. I'm going to just quickly go through a number of pictures because I think they speak better than just a voice. What we see here, those little tight spots on the branches are witches' brooms. That's what happens when salt is sprayed on a deciduous tree. And then here we have from a study, and all of you have this, so you could look this up. I've documented all of it. The top little trout was raised in a saline environment where there was too much salt in the water. The bottom little trout was raised in a more normal environment. So what's actually going on out there? These are pictures that I've taken. And in the top In this picture here, you can see way too much salt. It hasn't been calibrated in any way. I'm sure many of you have seen when you shop around the city these plastic containers. And when you open them up, inside you see, in this case, a bucket, and that is what is being used to apply the salt. No calibration whatsoever. In this picture, we see a community center parking lot, and there's a little tiny red arrow. That's my glove. This is a mound about a foot high that was dropped by whatever device or whatever truck was leaving the salt. Nobody got out to clean it up, so there's a lot of spillage going on. And it's not just city properties where this is happening. This is a salt bin at a grocery store, and same thing. Once you open it, you see that inside there's things that have no calibration whatsoever. There's no control over how much salt is put down. And actually, I caught the guy coming out and doing the salting. And if you notice, it's not even a lot of snow there. Again, we see this over-salting, just people out. That was a stock photo, the top one. The bottom one, though, really concerns me. It's a couple of guys in a pickup truck, and they just get the salt out and spread it. Maybe someone here has seen that. I actually saw that at the bus stop at Donlands. Because I do stewardship work, I'm always concerned, and that's why I'm here, about the effect of the salt in the water. Our aquatic systems are under barrage because of the many things that go into them. And what we see here is the pedestrian path from Broadview down to Todmorden Mills, and that's all salt that you see there. It has not in any way been calibrated. The bottom picture is actually a tiny little fish that actually lives down in the Oxbow, and how it survives all of this onslaught, I don't know. So I don't want to leave you depressed, so I'm going to give you some solutions. And these are just some things I found to make, you decision makers, please work on this thing. So the first one is mandate the use of spreaders. How hard is that? It's already on many of the city equipments, on the trucks and things like that, but not always. For some reason at TTC or in some places of the city, maybe it's contractors, I don't know, they're not using spreaders. Another thing, not a picture, is to implement a solar road panel pilot project. In our very own Toronto Green Technical Standards on page 27, you will see that there are actually pavers that heat up and melt things. Please implement new liability guidelines because in New Hampshire, they actually are training people so that the people on the ground can actually apply properly.
I'll ask for your final thought.
Okay, educate and communicate. Please read this. Thank you very much for hearing this from me today.
Thank you for your deputation, Ms. Davies. Is there any questions for the deputate?
Just might I say that, Ms. Davies, given since I put this out on social media, there are easily thousands of people as obsessed with oversalting as you and I think that that's a good sign, and hopefully as we move forward as a city, we don't do things perfectly. We're constantly learning, and hopefully we can do better.
Okay, thank you for putting that forward.
Thank you for your question of the deputant. I will now, are there any questions for staff? Move to speaker. Questions of staff. Councillor Fletcher, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. How many tons of salt do we use every year?
Through the speaker, we use about 120 to 130,000 tons of salt, and that would depend, of course, on the severity of the winter. But on average, that's the amount that we use annually.
And are there, I guess, is there a schedule? Is there a schedule for salting that is used by the division?
So under specific requirements under Environment Canada, the City of Toronto must have a salt management plan. And that salt management plan has specific requirements as it pertains to salt volumes and usage.
But is it every week, or is it when it snows, or are contractors hired to deal with a certain amount of tonnage? of
Yeah, so we
salt? Is that
apply
how it
salt.
works? Who's we, though?
We, the City of Toronto, through our contractors,
Through the contractors supply the salt?
right?
Okay.
We apply the salt through our contractors as an event occurs.
And they have no other time that they're salting that's in their contract? Their contract's clear? It's only?
It's clear, the salting is activated based on a direction from staff. So a contractor cannot apply salt for winter purposes unless directed by city staff.
So you press send on time to salt whenever there's an event, and outside of that, it doesn't happen?
Correct.
And so you saw that picture leading from Broadview down to Todmorden Mills with that amount of salt there, which of course goes straight to the Don River. Is that applied to the city standard? Or is there a standard, and does that meet the city standard?
So that specific photograph, as I understand it, pertains to Parks Division. The winter maintenance program from Transportation Services does not
so
apply
everybody
winter
has their
maintenance as it pertains to that particular example.
So can you just fill us in? There's the city, it's Transportation Division.
Correct.
Has a salting contract. Parks has a salting contract. TTC has a salting, who else has all these salting contracts?
Facilities would also have
Okay.
arrangements for salting.
TCHC, we could just, I guess in your report back, you'll be laying all of that out and what the contractual requirements would be, yes?
We can identify
All
where
of that?
there are specific contracts.
Well, I'm asking for that then, so I think staff are undertaking that they would provide that too. It's not just the city, there's many others who have these contracts for salting. Okay, thank you.
Mine.
Thank you, Councillor Fletcher. Any additional questions for staff? Move to speakers. Councillor Layton?
Oh, do you want to speak or no?
Oh, sorry.
Oh,
Our
man.
guest gets to speak first.
The mover's going to deal with that.
Okay.
So I'm just looking up really quickly how I want to amend it, and then pull a Councillor Cole, and here, it's easy. Yeah, you did, it did. So I'd like to amend my motion, motion 2, sorry, that the General Manager Transportation Services respond to the previous request, review of road salt and environmental impacts, and then I'll just, I'll say, and other relevant city divisions and agencies that use salt for roads.
So she's also asked for that for writing. So how about we stand down this item and we move on while both motions get finalized, and then we'll come back to both items. Are there any other speakers on this item before we do that? Is Councillor Cole's motion ready? Okay, so then we can move to item 1212. I have been notified that Councillor Ainsley is not able to return, so is there anybody around the table here that has questions? Anybody want to speak to that item? Somebody move receipt of the item. I'll move it. All those in favor? All those opposed? Item 1212 carries. That brings us to item 1214, and we have two deputants. Our first deputant is Jessica Speaker with Friends and Families for Safe Streets. It is nice to see you again. Thank you for joining us. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you. As you just heard, my name is Jessica Speaker, and I'm here to speak to you on behalf of a group called Friends and Families for Safe Streets. We are a group of people whose loved ones have been killed on our streets or who have survived a serious crash and very serious injury on our streets. We are strongly in favor of a citywide prohibition on right turns on red, and we commend this motion as a first step towards that goal. We hope that this report will also come back with an investigation about a citywide prohibition on right turns on red, which would certainly be better than some kind of counterintuitive patchwork of half measures, which would rely on drivers to notice signs at seemingly random intersections. Most drivers don't have direct knowledge of which intersections in the city are more dangerous than others, and we're not grappling with this urgent public health crisis of road violence because people driving cars are particularly good at noticing seemingly random signs. A universal prohibition would be easier to understand, easier to advertise, and get much better compliance. According to the city's statistics for crossing on a green light at a signalized intersection versus crossing mid-block, pedestrians walking across an intersection when they have the right-of-way accounted for 37% of all pedestrian crashes, whether the driver was turning left or right or blew a red light. Compare that to 40% of pedestrians who are struck mid-block. That means it's only 3% safer to cross an intersection in Toronto when you have the green light than it is to take your chances crossing mid-block on a suburban arterial. That is ludicrous. That is completely insane. Making sure drivers are prohibited from turning right on red would go a significant distance towards fixing that jaw-dropping fact. It's true that not all of the crashes at intersections were a result of a careless right turn on a red, and some critics have pointed out that not very many people are killed by drivers making careless turns on red lights. But that objection to a prohibition on right turns on red at its core presupposes that a few dead people is an acceptable toll to pay for the imperceptible convenience for one segment of road users who might save a few seconds on their commute. That system of values, which prioritizes convenience over human life, is directly in opposition to the system of Vision Zero, which this council unanimously voted to adopt. There are other people who are better at talking to you about numbers and the political greed behind why such a dangerous maneuver as a right turn on red was ever permitted in the first place, because it wasn't always permitted. But my specialty is explaining to you the human suffering behind the statistics, the human cost of your decisions. Road violence inflicted on vulnerable road users like pedestrians and cyclists is a literal human meat grinder. It is impossible to comprehend the pain of losing someone that you love randomly and suddenly through no fault of their own to the violence of being struck by a driver unless it happens to you or you hear about it from someone like me. And there's no shortage of stories of tragedies inflicted in Toronto by right-turning drivers. Some of them made splashes in the media, and you might remember them. Last August, a woman in her 70s was crossing at Midland and Shepherd when she was struck by the driver of a transport truck that turned right, which dragged her under the rear wheels. She was probably killed by that first crash, but it's a bit up in the air because she was struck again as she lay on the ground, dying or already dead, by a second driver. Both of those drivers fled. This crash was extremely gruesome. The organic matter, the bits of tissue and the blood, had to be hosed off the road by the first responders. This woman was treated like roadkill instead of a human being by two drivers in a situation that explicitly set her up to be endangered. Jenna Morrison was killed in 2011 by a truck driver turning right on a red again, sucked under the rear wheels and didn't stand a chance. She was on her way to pick up her young son, and she was 5 months pregnant at the time. Her husband lost not only his wife, but his child, and her son, who was already born, lost not only his mother, but also a sibling. Dahlia Chaco was a grandmother who was also crushed by a right-turning truck driver at a red light. She was a loving mother and had barely had a chance to enjoy her new phase of life as a grandmother. She was only around for a few months before a driver on Toronto streets killed her. Since she was killed, Skylar's welcomed a second child into his family who will never know the loving kindness of his grandmother because of Toronto's deadly streets. All of these people are so desperately missed, and all of these families are shattered and trying to get through the wreckage of their lives. The fallout of road violence is not limited to a crash or the subsequent rehabilitation or a funeral. Road violence is a life sentence, and these are the life sentences that could be prevented by an effective Vision Zero plan, which includes a prohibition on right turns on red. So we urge you to support this motion, and please also support it when it comes fully to fruition. Thank you.
Thank you for your deputation. Are there any questions for the deputant? Seeing none, thank you for coming in today. That leaves our final deputant of today, Sean Marshall with Walk Toronto. Thank you for joining us. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you. Walk Toronto is a grassroots volunteer advocacy group that works to improve walking conditions and pedestrian safety in the city. At Walk Toronto, we believe that proactively using right turns on red prohibitions across the entire city would save lives, and this is a sensible measure under Vision Zero. Allowing drivers to turn right on a red light creates a particularly dangerous environment for vulnerable road users, especially people who are blind, have a visual impairment, or children or seniors. In Toronto, the third most common type of collision is when a motor vehicle turns right when a pedestrian was crossing with the right-of-way intersection. 13% of pedestrian injuries or fatalities were a result of right-turning vehicles between 2008 and 2012. For right turns on red to work properly, all humans involved need to behave in a very particular way with no room for error. Unfortunately, the safety of pedestrians who have the right of way is compromised by this practice. Drivers turn right into pedestrians' path while assessing space available between cars while traveling full speed. I know when I'm a pedestrian, I see drivers who are looking left at oncoming traffic and not looking right at oncoming pedestrians. Although drivers must make a complete stop before turning, as mandated by the HTA, they don't always do. Right turns on red are especially problematic for pedestrians who are blind or children who are taught it's safe to cross only when the pedestrian has that green light or walk signal. A blind person relying on the audible signal has no way of knowing when a vehicle is about to cross their path. A child may not understand they need to double check before they cross. Right on red in practice means the right way that pedestrians are supposed to have is compromised, and a sense of security that the pedestrian green light provides is false. My fellow steering committee member, Danielle Levy-Pinto, who unfortunately cannot be here today, she is completely blind and gets around with her guide dog. She always crosses at the light with the accessible pedestrian signal. She has experienced many instances of drivers making right turns, suddenly appearing in her path and speeding in front of her. Fortunately, her guide dog has pulled her back while the driver is continuing on their path. Right on red prohibitions are needed to ensure the effectiveness of leading pedestrian interval signals in Toronto. One of the problems with the new leading pedestrian interval signals is that while they're intended to provide additional safety for pedestrians, letting them enter the intersection first, allowing right turns to red reduces their effectiveness. For example, Montreal, where right turns to red are prohibited across the entire island, the leading pedestrian signal is far more effective. New York, and more recently Mexico City, have also banned right turns on red. Vision Zero recognizes that humans make mistakes, and it aims to reduce the consequences of those mistakes. Vision Zero does not rely on human behavior to keep these roads safe. Rather, it designs conflict out of the system through infrastructure changes and legislation. Banning motor vehicle right turns to red into Toronto would reduce opportunities for conflicts between drivers and pedestrians, and thus prioritize the safety of vulnerable road users. Eliminating right turns on red only at selected locations is problematic in terms of predictability. A city-wide or even neighborhood ban on right turns on red will eliminate most of the costs of creating, installing, maintaining, and replacing prohibition signs at each intersection. Moreover, too many signs result in cluttering the roads with visual overload, which may help to distract drivers' attention from watching out from dangers on the road. Walk Toronto supports reducing the number of intersections that allow right turns on red. However, we see this as just the first step. If Toronto Council is truly committed to principles of Vision Zero, and if it's serious about following the example of pure cities such as Montreal, New York, and Mexico City, then it will enact a citywide blanket prohibition on right turns on red. Thank you.
Thank you for your deputation. Are there questions of the deputant? Seeing none, thank you so much for coming in today. Move to questions of staff. Deputy Mayor Min Wong.
We're talking about prohibitions on right turns on reds, right? Currently, you can make a right turn on a red light. Am I right? Yes. Oh, yeah, you can? Yes. Okay. So, pardon me? Thank you.
However, the law says on that red light, you must come to a complete stop. Is that correct?
Yeah, before you make the turn, yes.
That's right. So if you don't do that, that's a moving violation. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So if there was a no right turn on a red, they would still have to come to a complete stop. Am I correct?
Absolutely.
And if they wanted to break the law like they were when that sign wasn't there, that would also be a moving violation, correct?
Yes.
The only way that you can solve this problem effectively, because the guys who are, my guess is the folks that are like not looking both ways are the ones that are rolling through or doing something worse, are the only way that you can do that is to post an officer there to, that would be the material difference. That would be the stick that you would need to really enforce proper movements at that intersection, right?
Well, the only way to enforce it would be if there's an...
That's right. But in both circumstances, even with the sign there, it's still a moving violation. So we're talking about, it's the conduct of the person behind the wheel that is the operative part, because in both cases, the law is being broken.
Well, it's not a moving violation if you stop and then make a turn.
No, but if you don't, if you roll through, that's the moving violation.
Yes.
If you roll through, if you turn and you somehow endanger a pedestrian, that's also an offense, is it not?
Yes, but if you actually stopped and then went through and endangered a pedestrian,
That's also a violation. But what it all comes down to is, in all of those circumstances, whether there's a prohibition or not, when you act badly, whether you have a sign there or not, it's an offense.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Any additional questions of staff? Okay,
Well, no, that's okay.
we'll move to speakers. Anybody like to speak to this item? Councillor Layton?
Sure. So, I don't know about you, but I think most people out there have been standing at the corner, waiting to cross the street, just to have a stopped vehicle kind of inch their way over, and you see the driver looking. You see them looking to see if there's a car going the other way, or if the car in the right-hand most lane is turning, and they're just not paying attention to what's going on at their right. And yes, that's dangerous driving, sure. But if all we did was give out, or if we didn't make any bylaws on our road or rules of our road and just said, well, it's illegal if you hit someone, and that's what we relied on to keep people safe, like that would be absolutely ridiculous. Absolutely, like the argument is almost comical. It's so absurd. And the notion that we shouldn't make bylaws because we don't have a cop on every corner, why make bylaws at all then? Like, why do we have any rules in this in our city if there isn't an individual on every corner? Yes, enforcement is key, and I get the point that's trying to be made, that the bylaws are only good if we actually have people to enforce them, and if people, it's only a deterrent if people are afraid of getting a ticket. Because so far it's not been a deterrent enough not to kill someone or seriously injure someone, because we still see it happening on our streets. What I'm proposing isn't to all of a sudden take away some mythical right of drivers to drive quickly through our city. What I'm actually proposing is that city staff, as they're reporting back through Vision Zero, examine the proactive steps and give us some idea of those proactive steps that are being taken to put right turn restrictions on red. If that ends up being a blanket ban, I'll probably be supportive. But for the moment, I'd like them to start at least proactively bringing forward right turn restrictions at dangerous intersections, because we know that people are getting hurt. And I hope that this leads us to a world where we're a little bit more concerned with someone getting dragged under a vehicle because they made a right turn than a driver saving a couple extra seconds making that right turn. I hope that this leads us one more step in that direction of changing our thinking about this. And it's a staff report.
Okay, any additional speakers? Deputy Mayor?
So I'm going to support Councillor Layton's recommendation. What I see most of the time when you get to an intersection and there's a pedestrian crossing, most of the time, that person who's creeping up, if they see the person, they'll stop immediately because they know that that person's there. I think most of the time, the drivers are very agreeable. Like, they don't want to, but they see that pedestrians are important, that they don't want to conflict with them, and that they've got to get across the street. So this idea, this proposition that all drivers are going to, push through or endanger the pedestrians, I think certainly there are bad drivers, but I think the vast majority of them are very respectful of pedestrians. I have a motion that I'm going to put up on the screen, or no, that they're going to put up on the screen. It says the General Manager of Transportation Services report on the impact that right turn prohibitions and other changes to roadways that delay traffic have cumulatively had on travel times and delays in the city. The General Manager of Transportation Services report on the impact that travel delays and increased congestion and gridlock have on increased stress on drivers, increased aggressive behavior and accidents, and that the General Manager of Transportation Services report back on conducting research as part of Vision Zero on the causes of aggressive driver behavior. So behind this, and one of the things that we haven't studied and that we haven't looked at that should be part of Vision Zero, and I would suspect that we all want to lessen the accidents, is why are drivers becoming more aggressive and driving irresponsibly? And then there's a theory out there, because of all the delays and all the speed bumps and all the unnecessary stop signs and everything that we're doing, that's causing stress in drivers, and they're more apt because they get all upset and they're stuck in lines. And I'll use an example that the Deputy City Manager can appreciate. If she's going down to work down Leslie Street these days in the morning, and she gets in line there to turn, they've put a right. There used to be a curve. There used to be a merge. But now they've squared the intersection, and now if you're going during the AM peak hour, the lineup to make that right-hand turn is easily half a kilometer long. And people are waiting unnecessarily. And if you put that no right-hand turn on a red, it's going to make that line even longer. And the question is, writ large, if you do it writ large, one of the questions is that necessary, or are you unnecessarily delaying traffic? And fundamentally, when people are in traffic and in congestion and sitting behind their cars for so long, I wonder what it's doing to them, because what they'll start to do is they start to speed up. This is what I think. They start to speed up, and then they start to drive more aggressively. And then you have that example that Councillor Layton mentions, where they kind of try to roll into that intersection because they're so frustrated because they want to get home or they want to go to work. So I'm supporting Councillor Layton's motion for more information and a report. But I'm also adding on to it some other things that I'd like to look at just for the purposes of information. And then we'll see what we do with it.
Thank you. Any questions of the mover? I have a question for you. Sure. Items 1 and 2 require data that may not be there. So if there's data and that comes out as the report that this data is not there, how would you feel?
So if the report back is there and there's no data, the third one, as part of that, is the third one contemplates that and then reports back on whether we could actually conduct research and we can decide whether we want to do that. But I actually contemplated that idea of, maybe there isn't any data. And if there's not, maybe we should conduct the data, because this should inform Vision Zero, like what we're doing, what the delays are like, and what is the impact on people, right? That's what I want to do.
So you give staff latitude if they don't have data to report?
Come back and say, we don't have any data on that, or we can't find any data. There's no information on that. And then we could go and say, you know what? We have people that can do that research, and I know that we do. Like, we can contract that information out, and that data is readily collectible. We could decide whether we want to do that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, would you care to add any other stressful things in people's lives to how they might contribute to driver stress, like poverty, underpay, work conditions, tight the kids, the effect of the coronavirus on people's driving behavior. Do you want us to add them all to that list?
I
think that would probably be, that would at least provide us a better picture of what is stressing people out and when they're behind the wheel.
Well, what I want to understand, Councillor, is how, within the context of Vision Zero and all the ways that we're slowing down traffic, what's the effect on that? And you know, we haven't really answered the question. We've answered part of the question about how come there are more accidents happening, there are more people getting hit, like 10 years ago as opposed to today. We know, and part of that, I think, is people are crossing mid-block. We've got a higher seniors population. Those are kind of like data points that are easily identifiable, right? But we haven't really asked the question. There are more questions that we need to ask. We haven't asked the question, you know, in addition to that, why are drivers driving like crazy people now, right? I don't have an answer to that. I'd like to see if this is one of those reasons, because if you want to reduce the number of accidents, you have to answer the question, why are more drivers driving like crazy people?
So if I could then make the suggestion, then start with number 3. Don't all of a sudden assume that it's traffic delays and Vision Zero that are causing people stress. I can vote for 1 and 2. I can vote for 3, but not 1 and 2, because you're presupposing that these are the triggers for people's aggressive driving behavior, rather than saying, let's do research on the causes of people's aggressive driving behavior and see what comes from it. So I'll be supporting 3, but not 1 and 2. Maybe that's not.
Okay. I just think, I think it would be useful also to see just like how much is traffic being delayed because of all the things that we're doing. I think people would be interested in that.
Okay, thank you. Any additional speakers?
Fine. Well, let's see it. Let's see it, Mike.
We move to the amendment before us to vote.
If I could get items numbers 1 and 2 voted on separately than number 3.
Okay.
And I'll ask for a recorded vote on the first one. I don't really care about the second.
Okay, so we have to vote on all 3 separately then?
No, we'll
1 and 2 we can vote together.
Together.
3.
Okay.
Yeah.
I thought you were saying the first one.
To this item too.
I called speakers.
Yeah, did you call?
I'll move.
Yes.
I'll move to let Councillor Cole
Okay.
speak.
Yeah. Just, but I think in terms of Councillor Minnan Wong's thing, I think it's good to have that information, and if there is any, it all adds to our greater knowledge of the angst that there is on our roads. So I don't really object to that. I just wanted to put on the board the total decline in the number of tickets issued by Toronto Police, the enforcement levels over the last 7 or 8 years that we have data from. You can see from 700,000 moving violation charges that were laid back in 2010. Now we've got 200,000. So, you know, we can do all these measures about Vision Zero. We can introduce the prohibition of turning right on red. But if there isn't enforcement out there, I don't know how we're going to really make a dent in improving traffic safety. If there isn't some kind of stick along with the carrots, we are going to have an ongoing challenge when we're not getting enforcement of our traffic laws. And these are, you know, moving violations, running stop signs, distracted driving. You can see the tickets are not being issued as they once were before. So, I mean, what's the impact of this on traffic safety and deaths? And
I think it's a good point.
so, and we really haven't come to grips with it. I know I got into a bit of a debate with a police sergeant last week over this, and said we should be hiring more police officers than they would issue tickets. But anyways, I find this very much one of the root causes of why we are getting a lot of bad behavior, and it's you know, by everybody on our roads because there's no enforcement. The enforcement has dropped off dramatically, and nobody's talking about it. So we can put up all the Vision Zero measures we want. We can put up all of our reduced speed limits to 30. But who's going to enforce it? Nobody's enforcing it. Now, we're going to hire, I think, the police agent wardens. I don't know where they are because they're a mythical group that one day will appear, but I'm looking forward to those agents. And that's no fault of the city. We've been getting a bit of slow response from getting permission of the province to do that, but they'll help. But I don't know, we're getting 20 or something. So we need enforcement. Without enforcement, all of our good efforts, and these are part of what Councillor Layton is doing, but the deputy has talked about making our streets safer. Unless there's enforcement, luckily we've got technology, the red light camera technology, we've got that, and one day we'll actually have a comprehensive system of the speed cameras. But anyways, it's very, very frustrating to see that there's no enforcement.
Like the ad on the slide, too.
Okay, everybody has now spoken. We will vote on item 1A and B recorded.
1 and 2. All those in favor? Recorded.
All those in favor of the highlighted section above, 1 and 2. Councillor Cole, Councillor McKelvey, Deputy Mayor Minnan-Mong. All those opposed? Councillor Layton, that motion carries. On the, do you want to record a vote on the balance of the motion?
No. Item 3, the balance. All those in favor? On the motion as, motion 3, yeah, and then the item is amended. All those in favor? Okay, item is finished. We will move back to item 1211. Councillor Cole, you're now ready to introduce your motion.
Oh, yes. Getting to my favorite topic of police enforcement, here's my motion. City Council requests that the Toronto Police Services Board to increase traffic enforcement in the area of the Allen Road on Eglinton Avenue West from Glenarden Road, Westover Hill Road to the Allen Road to deal with the unprecedented traffic safety concerns in the area of the Eglinton Crosstown construction. So just asking for enforcement because everybody's making U-turns, they're driving the wrong way, they're on the sidewalks. It's like Councillor Minnan-Mong says, it's what mayhem. No, it's worse than mayhem. Okay, thank you.
All right. All those in favor?
Okay, all those in favor of Councillor Cole's motion? Item carries. That brings us back to item 1213. Councillor Layton, you had a motion?
Yes, thank you very much. The City Council requests the General Manager of Transportation Services, other relevant city divisions, agencies, and boards to report on their use of road salts and the environmental impacts and report back before the end of the second quarter of 2020. This was kind of a Frankenstein motion just to try to include some of the other agencies, boards, and commissions that weren't included in the original ask from Councillor Robinson, who I should just give a shout out for sort of starting this a couple of years ago and us not quite getting there yet. The second part of the motion, of my motion, wanted to get to ensuring that as we do future contracts, we start ensuring that that maintaining and upholding our salt management plan is included there, and perhaps something that's enforceable. It's tricky. Like, it's tough to apply these salts. But it seems like we've gotten more and more relaxed with our application. And I know that all of you have seen this because it happens around this very building where we spend all that money on that beautiful square and then somehow it gets just piled up with salt. Some of it may be that that's the approach taken to meet our safety requirements. But sometimes I see that pile of salt and you just got to wonder how much of it is just being wasted, so money out the door, and the environmental damage that's taking place as a result. So I want to make real sure that everywhere along the line we're auditing our contractors that do the work, that we're auditing ourselves to ensure that we're doing it appropriately, and that we're using as little as possible of things that we know do environmental harm. Thank you.
Okay. Any additional speakers on the item? So we can vote on the amendment, or can we the whole item together? Amendment. Okay. On the amendment, all those in favor? All those opposed? Amendment carries. On the item as amended, all those in favor? All those opposed, item carries. That takes us to item 1215, which was walked on this morning, updating school pickup and drop-off zones. Councillor Layton had moved it onto the agenda. On behalf of Councillor Fletcher, we move to questions. Are there any questions of staff? Councillor Fletcher, questions? No, I don't have any. No questions? It takes us to speakers. Anyone to speak to the item? Councillor Fletcher?
I will just speak to that. We all know that there were a number of cuts made to school boards, and the Toronto District's Board is changing its hours for drop-off and pickup. I don't know how many councillors have schools that have drop-off and pickup areas on the main streets, but they're all signed. It's all by bylaw, and it will be mayhem if we don't sort that out. So that would go to another mayhem.
everywhere.
That would go to the community councils. I was hoping to be able to just send it to each community council. I was informed by the clerk I can't. Has to come from here to each community council, but with this, it can be initiated there, so councillors can make sure that that job gets done for their schools as quickly as possible for September start. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fletcher. Anyone else speak to the item? Okay, the item is on the screen. All those in favor? All those opposed? The item carries. Thank you for pointing out that problem to us. No, one more. Last one. Item 1216, prohibiting snow clearing. It's your item. Yeah. Prohibiting snow clearing activity within commercial properties located 100 meters or less from residential areas between 12 a.m. and 6 a.m. Any questions of the item? Speakers? All those in favor of the item, you will pull it up. All those in favor? All those opposed? Item carries. Thank you. That's adjourned.